Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and another video. Today I'm going to show you how I painted this sweet little baby girl in my A4 watercolour sketchbook. So I'll be sharing the techniques I used to create baby smooth skin, delicate facial features, realistic skin folds and fine baby hair. So I hope you enjoy the video and find it interesting or useful. As always, all the materials I'm using will be listed in the description box below, along with a link to the reference photo from Pixabay, which I'll keep on screen throughout the video as well, so you can see what I'm working from. So without further ado, let's get on with the video. I started off by drawing an accurate outline sketch, and for this I experimented with using two different types of pencil. The first is a Faber-Castell watercolour pencil in the shade Venetian red. I thought this would be less visible on the finished painting than regular graphite pencil, as it would blend into the skin tones when I added water. It's not essential though, and I did also use a regular graphite pencil to mark in the darkest parts of the facial features, like the eyes, nostrils and mouth, so I didn't lose sight of these. The important thing to remember though, whatever pencil you're using for your outline sketch, is to keep it nice and light if you're aiming for realism. So use a harder pencil like a 2H, or lift up some of the graphite with a kneaded eraser before adding any water or paint. I've left my sketch a bit darker so you can see it better on the video. Okay, the next thing I decided to do before I got started on painting the skin tones was to simplify my process by first painting in where the darkest values are, using transparent umber. It's a bit like an underpainting, and although typically in watercolour you would paint from light to dark, mapping out where your darkest values are right from the start can help you better judge the values for the rest of the painting. It also gives you a better sense of where everything is anatomically and simplifies the process from the beginning. I use the tip of my size 8 brush to indicate the toes, in the creases, the eyes and the nostrils. These lines won't be noticeable as lines later on as we build up our skin tones. Once that's dry, I can now start painting a base skin tone, and for this I used a very diluted Venetian red watercolour, which is a pinky brown. What colour you use though will depend on what skin tone you're painting, as well as what supplies you have, so try swatching out some colours and colour mixes on a scrap piece of paper first if you're not sure. It is only the first layer though, so don't worry too much. To achieve baby smooth skin, I like to use the wet in wet technique for this first layer, so I pre-wet my paper first with clean water before dropping in any watercolour. Working wet on wet gives you the flexibility to vary the amount of paint you apply whilst the paper is still wet. So you can add more pigment to the areas that are darker in value, like on the baby's back, and in areas of shadows, like under the neck and on the feet for example. And you can add less pigment where the values are lighter. Because you are applying paint to damp paper, you don't get any hard edges forming, which you want to avoid when painting smooth skin. Don't forget to paint the skin on the baby's head too, as with baby hair often being quite fine, you'll see some of that skin showing through. With that first layer completely dry, we can now start to build up the skin tones, and I like to do this gradually, working in layers. I'm pre-wetting the paper again here before dropping in some watery burnt umber this time. I go over the whole of the baby's body again, still applying more pigment into those darker areas. I also lightly paint over the skin folds I marked in at the start, as to make these skin creases look realistic, you want to have a gradual transition between the darkest values and the lightest ones, and not a hard edge. I add in a few lighter creases here too onto the damp paper, and let them bleed out softly for a more natural look. Moving on to the face, I make sure to pay extra close attention here to where the darkest and lightest values are, as this will help to add shape and form. Looking back at the reference photo, there's a lot of shadow on the left side of the baby's face, but also some under the eyes, nose and mouth. I let that all dry again and then repeat the process to add in some warmer, more pinky skin tones. So for this layer I'm using a mixture of burnt sienna and cadmium red light. On this layer I applied the colours separately and let them blend and bleed together on the surface of the wet paper. When it got to the face again, I mixed in a bit more burnt umber for the darker left side here, and then continued to add burnt sienna and cadmium red light again as I'd done for the rest of the body. Lastly, for this layer I darkened up the skin on the forehead and the baby's head again. So for the next stage I'm switching down to a smaller size 4 round brush. This will give me a bit more control over where my paint is going, especially in those smaller areas like the toes and the fingers. I'm also switching to the wet on dry technique where I apply my watercolour straight onto the dry paper. I can still have soft paint edges though, just by running a clean damp brush along the edge of the wet paint line. After the body I moved onto the face again and mixed in a bit of ultramarine blue to my paint mix to create a more purpley skin tone on the left hand side of the face and around the eyes. I'm still applying the paint to dry paper here and softening out the paint edges with clean water to maintain that nice smooth baby skin texture. It's also time to start adding in more detail to the facial features, so we can darken up the shadows under the nose and mouth as well as around the eyes, but being careful not to cover up any of the lighter areas that you might see directly under the eyelashes or on the tip of the nose, for example. So keep checking back with your reference photo to keep that in mind. This will really help the baby start to look more 3D as you add in more depth and a bigger range of values. So the painting is starting to come together, but before I go any further, I'm just going to sketch in a few guidelines for the baby's hair whilst the paper is dry. You don't have to do this and can go straight in with watercolour if you feel confident to do so, but it can really help to simplify the process by marking out the length and direction of some of the clumps of hair before you commit to adding paint. As before though, it's really important to keep these pencil lines as light as possible. Adding in even the suggestion of some baby hair really makes a difference, but rather than go in with watercolour and paint the hair now, I decided to go ahead and paint the lips and darken up the baby's eyelines, as I had a feeling my skin tones would need to go darker even before painting in the hair. I'm still using my size 4 brush and painting onto dry paper, and for the lips used a mixture of cadmium red light and transparent red. It's best to start lighter with the lips, and remember that the darkest part will usually be where the lips meet and not round the outside, but use your reference photo to help you. I use the very tip of my brush and a fairly steady hand to darken up the eye lines with concentrated burnt umber. Some more shading under and around the nose and eyes also help to add a more three-dimensional and realistic look. I'm happier with the skin tone now, and it's all dry, so I can start to paint the baby's fine hair. I'm going to use a size 1 script liner brush to start with, as it will help me to create long fine hair easily. I also use a regular size 2 round brush, but any brush that holds a nice fine point will do fine. I use a mixture of burnt umber, Van Dyke brown and sepia to get the colour I want, and paint onto the dry paper, painting right up on the tip of my brush and painting in the direction of hair growth. The pencil guidelines really help to make this part a lot easier and more enjoyable than if I had to try and think about everything at once, but do whatever suits you best. I work on one section or clump of hair at a time and just build up the hair gradually. Don't forget to paint a few flyaway hairs as well, as this will really help to add realism to your painting. When this first layer is dry, and to add more depth, I can then go back over with a more concentrated paint mix. This also adds some variety to the hair colour, so it's not all the same, which will help the hair to look more natural. Don't forget to add in some little fine wispy bits of hair round by the side of the face too. That's all dry now, and it's not looking too bad, but I think the baby's scalp is too pale. So another watercolour technique I can use here is to apply a glaze over the dry paper. I'm using a diluted burnt umber just to change the overall colour up a bit, and I'm much happier with how it looks. I also add some dilute burnt sienna just under the hairline at the front here, and where the hair casts a shadow. I use the same glazing technique to add a bit more of a glow to the baby's face and body too. It's really easy and effective. I decided not to do a background for this piece, as I mainly wanted to practice painting soft baby skin and facial features, but I did just add a bit of grey that I'd mixed up from burnt sienna and ultramarine blue around the underside of the baby's body. So the last thing to paint on this portrait is the baby's headband, and rather than leave it white like in the reference photo, I decided to go for a soft purple. This is a ready-made mauve from my Schminke palette, and I just watered it down and applied it onto the dry paper. I added a second layer once the first was dry to add some darker shading on the ribbon. And then darkened up the hair adjacent to the band to add contrast and help it all look a bit more three-dimensional. The final step was to go in and add any finishing touches. Often I do this with colour pencil, but today I just used a bit of white gel pen to bring out the highlights on the ribbon. This sketchbook painting was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoyed watching it and maybe even found the tips and techniques useful. I'd love to know what you think, so please drop me a comment in the box below, and if you like the video please give it a thumbs up and a share, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more videos like this one. Thank you all so much for watching, have a great weekend, take care, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!